The wind, a razor of ice and fury, tore at Eleanor's thin calico dress, whipping the tattered fabric against her bleeding shins. It screamed a high, mournful song through the twisted, skeletal branches of the mesquite, a chorus for her own despair. Each ragged breath she drew was a shard of glass in her lungs, each step a testament to a will that was beginning to fracture. Behind her, in the gathering gloom that bled across the unforgiving plains, was a monster in the shape of a man. Silas Croft. His name was a brand on her memory, a symbol of a promise that had curdled into a possessive, cruel obsession. He had painted a picture of a new life for her in the West, a life of respect and partnership, but the paint had been a thin veneer over a canvas of brutal entitlement. She was not to be his wife, but his property, a pretty thing to be displayed and controlled. When she had finally found the courage to flee his gilded cage of a ranch house, she had run not just from him, but from the ghost of the naive woman she had once been. Now there was only the vast, indifferent wilderness, an enemy as terrifying as the one she had left behind. The sky was a bruise of purple and black, threatening to burst. The last vestiges of sunlight clung weakly to the distant, jagged peaks, a dying ember of the hope she had carried with her. Her feet, raw and blistered within her ruined shoes, stumbled over a loose rock, and she fell, the hard, cold earth rising up to meet her with a final, indifferent slap. There was no strength left to rise. The cold was a creeping numbness, a seductive whisper promising an end to the pain, the fear, the relentless pursuit. She curled into a ball, the wind her only blanket, the hard ground her only bed. As her vision blurred and the world began to fade into a merciful blackness, she thought she saw a shadow detach itself from the deeper shadows of the rocks above, a figure, tall and silent, watching her. It was not the form of Silas or his men. It was something else, something wilder, older, a spirit of the land itself. Or perhaps it was just a final, desperate hallucination before the end. The storm finally broke, and the rain fell like tears upon a world that had already forgotten her name. She had been betrayed by her own kind, and now she was being swallowed by the wild. This, she thought with a final, fleeting clarity, was how her story would end, a forgotten footnote in a vast and savage land. Have you ever found yourself in a place so desolate, so completely stripped of all you once knew, that the very concept of hope feels like a cruel joke? Have you ever felt a loneliness so profound it becomes a physical weight, pressing down on your soul until you fear it might simply shatter? This is the story of a woman who knew that desolation. This is the tale of Eleanor Vance, a soul cast out from the world of men, left for dead in the heart of a merciless frontier. Her journey was not one of miles crossed over dusty plains, but of the vast, uncharted territory of the human heart when it is broken and must learn to beat again. It is a story that asks a fundamental question. When the world you trusted turns against you, where do you find the strength to build a new one? And can a home be found in the arms of someone who the world has taught you to fear? We are often told that salvation comes from familiar places, from the comfort of our own culture, our own people. But what if rescue comes in a form you cannot understand? What if a hand offered in kindness belongs to a man whose language you do not speak, whose ways are as alien as the moon? This is the story of two worlds colliding in the eye of a storm, the world of a woman running from a cruel and possessor's greed, and the world of a man who had long ago retreated from the poison of that same greed. It is a testament to the idea that true family is not always of blood, but of spirit. It is a chronicle of a love that was never meant to be, a love that defied prejudice, hardship, and the very laws of a society built on division and fear. So, I invite you to walk this path with us, to witness the journey of a resilient survivor and a stoic protector, and to see for yourself how the most beautiful flowers can bloom in the harshest of soils. For in their story, we might just find a reflection of our own capacity for courage, for redemption, and for a love that has the power to heal all wounds. Eleanor awoke not to the biting cold or the howl of the wind, but to an unnerving silence. The world was still. The storm had passed. A heavy warmth covered her, a weight that was both foreign and comforting. She blinked, her vision slowly clearing, and realized it was a thick buffalo hide, rich with the scent of wood smoke and earth. Her gaze traveled upward, past the edge of the hide, to the figure standing sentinel over her. He was framed against the pale, dawn-lit sky, a silhouette carved from the very rock and canyons that surrounded them. He was tall, his shoulders broad, his long black hair unadorned and falling past a face that seemed etched by sun and sorrow. He was a native warrior, and a jolt of pure, primal fear, sharper than any cold, shot through her. This was the figure from her final waking moments. He was real. She tried to scramble backward, a choked cry dying in her throat, but her body was a leaden weight, protesting with a symphony of aches. The man did not move. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes holding a depth that seemed to contain all the secrets of this vast, wild land. There was no malice in his gaze, but no softness either. It was the impassive, watchful look of a hawk studying its domain. He held a small, wooden cup in one hand. After a long moment that stretched into an eternity, he knelt down, moving with a silent, fluid grace that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. He extended the cup to her. Water. Clear, clean water. Her throat was a desert, her lips cracked and bleeding. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to recoil from this stranger, this savage as the world had taught her to see him. But the primal need for water, for life, was stronger. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm, calloused, a stark contrast to the chilling fear that still gripped her. She drank, the water a cool balm to her parched soul. He said nothing. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with unspoken questions, with the vast gulf of their two different worlds. When she had finished, he simply took the cup back. He looked at her tattered dress, her bruised and swollen feet. Then, without a word of warning, he reached down, sliding one strong arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. The initial shock gave way to a wave of utter helplessness. Yet, cradled against his solid chest, wrapped in the heavy hide, a strange sense of security began to seep into her bones, warring with her fear. He began to walk, his stride long and sure-footed over the treacherous terrain. She had no idea where he was taking her, whether it was to salvation or a different kind of doom. But as he carried her away from the site of her collapse, away from the path Silas Croft might follow, one thought pushed through the fog of her exhaustion. For the first time in days, she was not alone. His dwelling was not a teepee, as she might have imagined, but a small, sturdy cabin built into a sheltered bluff, almost invisible against the rock face. It was a sanctuary hidden from the world. Inside, the single room was sparse but impeccably clean. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a low fire casting a warm, flickering glow on the smooth wooden surfaces. There were no chairs, only soft furs laid out on the floor. He gently placed her on one of these piles of fur near the fire, the heat immediately beginning to chase away the deep, settled chill in her bones. For the next several days, they lived in a world almost devoid of words. He was a creature of quiet, deliberate action. He would leave for hours at a time, returning with game or roots, which he would prepare with a practiced, efficient skill. He cleaned the cuts on her feet and arms with a poultice of herbs that stung at first, but then soothed the inflammation, their pungent, earthy smell filling the small space. He would leave food and water for her, a simple broth, a piece of roasted meat, and then retreat to his own side of the cabin, giving her space. He was a constant, silent presence. Eleanor spent those first days in a haze of fear and fascination. She watched him, her eyes tracking his every move. She watched the way he mended a tool, his long fingers surprisingly deft. She watched the way he stared into the fire, his face a mask of stoic gravity, wondering what ghosts he saw dancing in the flames. The fear that had been her constant companion began to slowly, almost imperceptibly, recede. It was impossible to remain terrified of a man who showed her nothing but quiet, respectful care. His silence was not threatening, it was solid, like the mountains that sheltered them. It was a silence that made her feel safe. One afternoon, while he was out, she found the strength to sit up properly. Her body still ached, but the gnawing exhaustion had been replaced by a slow-returning vitality. She looked around the cabin, truly seeing it for the first time. It was a man's space, functional and unadorned, yet there was a sense of peace to it, of order. He had built a life here, a fortress of solitude against a world that had clearly wounded him as deeply as it had wounded her. When he returned, he found her sitting up, her gaze fixed on the fire. He stopped in the doorway, a brace of rabbits in his hand. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she did not look away in fear. She held his gaze, and in that shared look something shifted. A fragile, unspoken understanding passed between them. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of her returning strength. He entered the cabin and began to prepare the evening meal, and the quiet routine resumed, but it was different now. The air was no longer thick with her fear, but with a new, tentative curiosity. She was a guest in the home of a stranger, a man the world called a savage, and yet she had never felt more protected. The slow, quiet rhythm of their days became a healing balm for Eleanor's fractured spirit. As her physical strength returned, she found she could not remain idle. She began to contribute in small ways, her movements initially hesitant, always watching him for a sign of disapproval that never came. She took the needle and thread she found in a small leather pouch and began meticulously mending the tears in his spare buckskin shirt, her stitches small and even, a skill learned in a different lifetime. He watched her work one evening, his dark eyes lingering on her hands. When she finished, she folded it and placed it near him. He picked it up, ran a thumb over her neat handiwork, and gave that same, small nod of approval that was becoming their primary form of communication. It filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She began to help him prepare food, learning by watching. She learned to grind dried corn into meal, to sort wild herbs, her senses slowly attuning to this new life. He, in turn, began to show her things. He would take her just outside the cabin, pointing to a plant and saying its name in his Kiowa tongue. He taught her which berries were safe, which roots held water. He showed her how to read the clouds for signs of rain, how to listen to the birds for warnings of predators. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, pleasant rumble, a sound that resonated deep within her. One night, as a coyote howled its lonely song to the moon, she found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why?" she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "Why are you helping me?" He was sharpening a knife by the firelight, the stone making a soft, rhythmic hiss against the steel. He paused, his hands going still. He looked at her, his gaze direct and piercing, as if seeing past her skin and into her very soul. "My family," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "was taken by a sickness your people brought. They were good. They were kind. The world showed them no kindness." He set the knife down. "I see their goodness in you. I will not let the world take it." The simple, devastating honesty of his words broke through the last of her defenses. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear or self-pity, but of a profound shared sorrow. She, too, had been betrayed by the cruelty of the world. She told him then of Silas, of the lies in the gilded cage, of her desperate flight. He listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask, but she could feel his anger, a cold, still thing that settled in the small cabin. When she was finished, he reached out and gently touched a lock of her hair, which had come loose from her braid. "Here," he said, his voice softer now. "You are not that man's property. Here, you are Wioska. Sun woman. Because you survived the darkness." And in that moment, she was reborn. She was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the victim. She was Sun woman, a survivor, living in the care of a man named Koda, the Kiowa word for ally, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt the first stirrings of a new and unexpected home. The peace they had so carefully constructed was as fragile as a desert flower. Koda knew this. The world of men like Silas Croft was a poison that seeped into even the most hidden corners of the land. Far from the sheltered bluff, in the dusty, raucous town of Redemption, Silas Croft was a man consumed by a cold fire of fury. Eleanor was his. The thought was an incessant drumbeat in his skull. It was not love or even desire, but the raw, unyielding arrogance of ownership. That she, a woman he had plucked from destitution, had dared to defy him, to flee his protection, was an insult that could not be borne. It was a stain on his name, a challenge to his authority in a land where a man's authority was everything. He had wealth, and wealth bought loyalty of a certain kind. He hired 2 men, trackers known more for their ruthlessness than their skill. One was a wiry, weasel-faced man named Jeb, whose eyes held a perpetual, greedy glint. The other was a hulking brute called Luther, a man who communicated primarily through grunts and violence. Silas stood before them on the porch of his grand ranch house, the sprawling property a testament to his power. "She is weak and alone," Silas spat, his voice laced with contempt. "She cannot have gone far. I don't care how you find her. I don't care what you have to do to the savage filth that might be helping her. I want her brought back. Understand?" Jeb just smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "For the price you're paying, Mr. Croft, we'd track a ghost through hell." The hunt began. We see them moving through the landscape, a brutal counterpoint to the quiet life Koda and Eleanor were building. They were a scar on the land, loud, careless, leaving a trail of disruption in their wake. They questioned homesteaders with threats, spooked game, their presence a ripple of discord. Back in the hidden canyon, Koda grew restless. He began to spend more time away from the cabin, scouting the perimeter of his territory. He would return with a new tension in his shoulders, his silence heavier than before. One evening, he came back just as the sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows. He held something in his hand. A cigar butt, its expensive brand, one he recognized from the white man's towns. He had found it near their spring, less than a mile away. He showed it to Eleanor. The blood drained from her face. She didn't need to ask. She knew. He was here. The sanctuary was no longer safe. The idyllic bubble had burst, and the cold, harsh reality of the world they had tried to escape was now upon them. The fear she thought she had conquered came rushing back, a bitter tide. But this time it was different. It was mingled with a fierce, protective anger, not just for herself, but for Koda, and for the fragile peace he had so generously shared with her. The attack came at dawn, the time between darkness and light, between dreaming and waking. A gunshot shattered the morning stillness, the sound of sacrilege in their peaceful canyon. The bullet splintered the wooden doorframe of the cabin, inches from where Koda was stoking the morning fire. He moved with the instantaneous, lethal grace of a panther, grabbing his bow and a quiver of arrows as he shoved Eleanor toward the back of the cabin, to a small, concealed escape route hidden behind a stack of furs. "Go," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Run to the caves in the high rocks. Do not stop." But Eleanor hesitated. The woman who had run from Silas Croft, who had collapsed in exhaustion and terror, was gone. In her place stood Sun Woman. She looked at Koda, at the grim set of his jaw, the warrior's light in his eyes, and she knew she could not leave him to face this alone. This was her fight, too. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am not running anymore." A look of surprise, quickly replaced by a fierce pride, flickered across his face. He didn't have time to argue. The brutal sound of an axe splintering the cabin door echoed through the small space. He notched an arrow, his focus absolute. "Stay low," he ordered. The door crashed inward, and Luther, the hulking brute, filled the frame, a cruel grin on his face. Koda's arrow flew, a silent, deadly whisper. It struck Luther squarely in the chest, the force of it throwing him backward with a choked gasp. From the side, Jeb, the weasel-faced tracker, fired his pistol into the cabin, the shot going wide. While Koda engaged him, drawing his attention, Eleanor remembered the lessons he had taught her. She saw the heavy iron pot of stew simmering over the fire. It was her only weapon. With a cry that was part fear, part fury, she grabbed the pot by its handle, heedless of the heat, and flung its boiling contents directly at Jeb as he tried to take aim at Koda again. He screamed a high, thin sound as the scalding liquid hit his face and chest, staggering back, blinded and in agony. But then Silas Croft himself appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of triumphant rage, a rifle raised and aimed directly at Koda's back. "He can't protect you forever, Eleanor," he snarled. Time seemed to slow. Koda was occupied with the screaming Jeb. Eleanor was unarmed. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. It was in that frozen moment that Eleanor truly became the hero of her own story. She did the only thing she could. She launched herself at Silas, a desperate, flying tackle, screaming his name. Her unexpected assault threw off his aim. The rifle discharged with a deafening roar, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling. She collided with him, sending them both tumbling out of the doorway and onto the hard-packed earth outside. She was no longer a damsel. She was a warrior, fighting for her home. The world outside the cabin was a chaotic whirl of motion and sound. Eleanor scrambled away from Silas, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He roared in frustration, raising the rifle to use it as a club. But his momentary distraction was all Koda needed. Another arrow flew from the shadowy interior of the cabin, striking Silas in the shoulder, forcing a cry of pain from his lips and making him drop the rifle. He clutched at the shaft embedded in his flesh, his eyes wide with a mixture of agony and disbelief. He stared at Koda, who now stood in the doorway, another arrow already notched, his expression as cold and unforgiving as the winter stone. "This is not your land," Koda said, his voice quiet, yet carrying with the weight of generations of injustice. "She is not your property." Silas, clutching his wounded shoulder, staggered backward, his face contorted with hate. "You savage," he spat, his arrogance warring with the pain. "She belongs with her own kind. She belongs to me." He lunged for the fallen rifle, his obsession overriding all sense. It was his final, fatal mistake. Koda's third arrow was a blur of motion, finding its mark in the center of Silas's chest. The man stopped, his body jerking as if struck by lightning. A look of profound, ultimate surprise crossed his features. He looked down at the arrow, then up at Eleanor, a silent, uncomprehending question in his eyes. Then he crumpled to the ground, the dust rising around him, his tyranny extinguished forever. The silence that followed was more profound than any that had come before. The echoes of the gunshots faded, leaving only the soft whisper of the wind through the canyon. The two trackers were dealt with. Luther lay still, and Jeb had fled, howling in pain. It was over. Eleanor stood, breathing in ragged gasps, her body trembling with adrenaline. Koda walked slowly toward her, his bow lowered. He stopped in front of her, his dark eyes searching her face. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently push a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch feather-light. He saw not the terrified woman he had found dying in the wilderness, but the fierce protector who had thrown herself at an armed man to save him. He saw Sun Woman, in all her blazing glory. She looked at him, at the man who had saved her, taught her, and given her a new name and a new life. In the aftermath of the violence, standing over the vanquished symbol of their pasts, their bond was forged anew, sealed not in words, but in the shared crucible of fire and blood. They had faced the worst the world could throw at them, and they had won. They were bruised, battered, but they were finally truly free. 2 winters had passed. The small cabin on the bluff was no longer just a shelter, but a home. The scars on the doorframe had been smoothed over, and a curtain, stitched by Eleanor from soft deerskin, now hung in the entryway. A small garden flourished in a sunny patch of earth nearby, where she grew corn, squash, and the herbs Koda had taught her to identify. The air of tense solitude was gone, replaced by a quiet, contented domesticity. Inside, the fire crackled, and the scent of baking bread mingled with the familiar smell of wood smoke. Eleanor sat on the warm furs, humming a soft tune as she rocked a small, sleeping bundle in her arms. It was a baby boy, his skin the beautiful color of warm copper, his hair as black as a raven's wing. He was the living symbol of their love, a child of 2 worlds, belonging wholly to the new one they had created together. Koda entered the cabin, carrying firewood. He moved with the same silent grace, but the harsh, sorrowful lines on his face had softened. He smiled as he looked at his wife and son, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes, crinkling their corners. He set the wood down and came to sit beside them, placing a gentle hand on the baby's head. "He sleeps," Koda murmured, his voice a low, happy rumble. "He has your peaceful heart." Eleanor leaned her head against his strong shoulder, a gesture of complete trust and belonging. "And he has your warrior's spirit," she replied softly. "He will be a good man." They had found their happily ever after, not in the grand promises of civilization, but in the simple, profound truths of the land and of their own hearts. Their life was one of shared purpose, tending their home, raising their son, and honoring the quiet rhythms of the seasons. They were a found family, a unit forged in adversity and strengthened by love. Sometimes, Eleanor would stand at the edge of the bluff and look out over the vast, sweeping plains. She would remember the woman who had stumbled through that wilderness, terrified and alone. She felt a deep compassion for that woman, but she no longer recognized her. That woman's fear had been burned away, leaving behind a core of resilient strength. She was Wiauska, the Sun Woman. She was Koda's wife and the mother of his child. She was home. And as Koda came to stand beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist, she knew that the love they shared was as strong and enduring as the ancient rocks beneath their feet, a quiet testament to hope, redemption, and the enduring power of the human heart to find its shelter. And so, the story of Eleanor and Koda comes to its gentle close. A story that began in the heart of a storm, found its peace in the shelter of a quiet love. It serves as a powerful reminder that our greatest trials often lead us to our most profound treasures. What can we learn from a woman who was betrayed by the world she knew, only to find her true self in a world she had been taught to fear? Perhaps it is that courage is not the absence of fear, but the act of moving forward in spite of it. And what can we learn from a man who had closed his heart to the world, only to find it healed by the one person he chose to save? Perhaps it is that redemption is not found in forgetting the past, but in building a future worthy of its lessons. Their love story teaches us that family is not defined by shared blood or a common tongue, but by the shared language of the heart, of kindness, of respect, and of unwavering loyalty. It shows us that true strength is not in domination or control, but in the quiet courage to protect, to nurture, and to love. In a world that so often seeks to divide us, to build walls between cultures and people, their life together stands as a testament to the bridges that can be built by 2 souls willing to see the humanity in one another. They remind us that home is not a place on a map, but a feeling of safety in the arms of another. If their journey from desolation to hope has moved you, if you believe in the power of redemption and the strength of a love that defies all odds, please share this story. Let their light be a beacon for others who may feel lost in the dark. Thank you for walking this path with us.